Next, we have David Glick here, and he's going to talk to us about the state of the Plone REST API. Take it away.
Yeah, hello and welcome. Good to be here in Finland. And I'm going to tell you about the REST API, which is one of the big components in Plone. Sort of an update on changes that we've done in the past few years and maybe where we go next. So yeah, I'm David. I work with Kit Concept mostly. I've been around in the Plone community for I think 18 years now. I was gone for a little bit, came back, and enjoy being here with you all. Okay, so what is Plone REST API? We aim for it to be a complete, stable, documented, extensible, language-agnostic API for the Plone CMS. So we'll go through each of those. Language-agnostic API. So when Plone was first created, it was in Python, and it rendered templates, and that was sort of the only way that you could build things. And we realized that it would be much more useful if you can access your content in whatever language is useful to you. So the goal with the REST API was to sort of create a layer in the middle, which is an interface between consumers of Plone and your Plone backend. So the goal with the API is to have a standard set of endpoints, a standard representation of your content, and then you can have different consumers like Volto, but also now 7 will be another one. Collective.export-import, plone.export-import are both using the REST API. You can write your own custom scripts that use it. And then on the back end, we of course have Plone itself, which has the package plone.restapi, but then we also have other implementations of the same API. Guillotino is one, Nick, which is Rob Giedema's project, is another. And the thing that makes this work is that they're all speaking this same language. And that representation is JSON. These are all just an example here, all the different fields on a content type. It has the ID, which gives the location and the type and everything else. The API is meant to be extensible. So if you're working on an add-on, you can add a custom endpoint that will be part of the API. And if you look at a particular content type, it has this section called components, which we also call expanders because you can expand them to add additional information about the content type. So you can write an add-on that is doing something special and it can add its own information about whatever piece of content you're looking at. It's been an important goal from the beginning of the project to be well documented. The goal is to be documentation first. So if we're adding a new endpoint, we first write the documentation to say how it should work. We read it and make sure that it makes sense to somebody. And then after that, we can implement it. This is the documentation, which is part of the full set of Plone documentation on docs.plone.org. The API is meant to be stable, which means a couple of things. It means that it's a way that you can use as a migration path between different versions of Plone. You can export your content into the serialization that the API provides as JSON, and then you can import that same thing into a different version of Plone that's using a newer version of the Plone REST API. Or you can, it also means that you can upgrade your backend, upgrade Plone with the REST API, but keep the same front end. So we try to avoid breaking changes in how the API works as much as possible so that it will continue to work with your existing front end. Our goal is to be complete, by which I mean anything that you can do in Plone in any interface, whether that's the ZOP interface or classic UI. Anything that you can do those ways, you should be able to do through the API. Reality that we have right now is it's complete enough, which means there's a few things that are missing. Any of you who are working with Plone maybe know of the times when you have to go back to classic UI or go into the ZOP interface. But the goal is to be complete. We want to fill in those gaps over time. All right, so that's kind of what we're aiming for. This is just a quick recap of how we got here. So Plone as a project started in like 2001. We didn't have the beginning of the REST API until 2014. And it came out of some work that Timo was doing, trying to look at some of the new JavaScript libraries that were coming along and fancy ways of building single-page applications, and trying to figure out how do we use this with Plone. And so he made a first commit to the plone.rest API repository in 2014, sort of coming out of some of the experiments with AngularJS, I think. And then the first release was a couple years later in 2016. By 2018, we had a 1.0.0 release, and that was the foundation of some very early Volto projects that Kit Concept was doing. Moving along from then, I'm not sure exactly when collective.export-import came along, but Philip was using plone.rest API as a major piece of how we serialize content for exporting and importing. In 2022, we had the release of Plone 6, where Volto became an official front end for Plone, and of course, Volto is relying heavily on the REST API, so the REST API at that point was part of Plone core officially. And then moving along since then, I just made a release sometime in the past week or so, 9.15.3. So we've had a few major releases in between there, adding various features and so forth. Also, within those past few years, we've sort of made the transition from Timo being the main release manager for Plone.rest API to I've sort of taken that over, at least as a de facto basis, so that Timo can focus on other work in the community and with our clients. All right, so I want to go through sort of basically what has happened with the REST API since Plone 6 came along, so the last few years. I'm going to try to have this not just be reading the changelog. I've tried to curate it a little bit, but I'll go through things briefly, and feel free to ask questions later. So a lot of the work has just been basic maintenance. We removed a couple endpoints that used to exist but that weren't really needed in version 9, I think, was when that happened. We've been continuing to add support, do tests on newer versions of Plone and Python. One particular piece of that is there are some components of Plone that we've turned into core add-ons. So Plone App Multilingual is an example of that, where it used to always be installed, and now it's something that you may choose to install or not. And so just making sure that the REST API handles that and won't break if that piece is missing. Plone App Discussion is another one of those. And then filling in missing translations as people have time to do that. Probably the biggest category where work has been happening is bug fixes, and I certainly can't list all of them, but I thought I would highlight a few things that have happened. We added some better validation for inputs to the API so that you're less likely to get just random 500 errors. Should be returning 400 bad requests instead. We've been making some small fixes to HTTP cache headers so that things are cached in a way that makes sense. We fixed the password reset. If you have email as login, that used to just not be working, and now it does. We made it so that if you want to customize how your text indexer works for a particular content type, you can do that for content that's using blocks. It used to be that REST API was completely overriding how indexing worked for blocks-based content, and now it indexes the blocks and then also runs the custom indexers the same as anything else. And then there was an annoying bug with time zones where if you opened a page and edited the effective date, it would not get stored in the same time zone that it was read, and so you would have this gradual shift of the times. We got that sorted out. The category of completeness is filling in features that were already available in Classic UI, but that you couldn't do through the REST API yet. Katya added the relations endpoint pretty early after we released Plone 6. We added support for exporting and importing URL aliases or redirects as CSV. Wesley Barossa-Lopez did some work on the users and groups endpoints for the permission checks. So it used to be only allowing you to manage users if you were a manager role. And we added support for doing that for site administrators so that you don't have to have complete control over the Plone site in order to manage users. We added support for the registry endpoint to do some filters so you can get just the records that you're looking for. And we improved the link integrity checks so that if you're deleting an item, it gives you some better information about how many sub-items are also going to be deleted. Moving along to other improvements that we've been making, the query string endpoint is the thing that drives the listing block and the search block when you're building a query for content. And it used to be always getting this information at the root of the site, which meant if you had any vocabularies that are supposed to return different values depending on what section of the site you're in, that wasn't working. Now it always gets the query string, or you can look up the query string information for any content item, and it will look up the vocabularies in that particular context. We added support for working copies of the Plone site root, I think in Plone 6.1. And the UID-based links, that's something that has been there for a long time. It's an important piece of link integrity. So if you are storing a link, which is just a normal URL externally, we actually convert that into a link that uses the UID for when it gets stored in the database. That way, if the content gets moved to some other location, the links continue to work. The improvements we made here are just making sure that that happens in more places. So if you've got blocks that contain other blocks, that will now automatically convert anything that's a field called URL. If you've got JSON-based fields that include URLs, those will also be included automatically. And also we made sure that if you've got a URL that has a fragment at the end of it, that will be preserved as it converts to UID-based links and back. The next few slides are some new services that we've added. So the site service is meant to provide global site settings. You might ask what's different about that from the registry endpoint. And the point of this is to really be something that's useful for Volto or some other front end that's built on the REST API and needs to get everything in one place when it first loads. So this is meant to be overall site settings that you need to do the basic rendering of your layout. It's meant to be only information that's public, the logo, the site title, that sort of basic information. So Volto now gets this once when it loads, and then as you navigate around, it doesn't get it every time that a new page is loaded. The login endpoint is something that Mikkel, I think, added. This is actually not really used just in Plone Core, but it's available for add-ons. So if you're writing an add-on that adds a new way of logging in, it can register itself here, and then Volto has a way of, or another front end has a way of looking up what are the login methods so that it can present those to the user. We added a nav route service. The navigation route is a feature that Plone has for creating site sections that have their different navigation. And we wanted to make an easy way to get the settings that are configured on the navigation route so that if you have different things that you want to show in the header or footer, you can add behaviors there and then look up the nav route in any context for the site. I will say that we made some mistakes in this and we included a few too many things. For example, you can see the blocks are here. We don't really want to be looking up the nav route data for everything that you're loading and also getting the blocks from the nav route when you're not rendering it. So that's a piece that we might clean up at some point. We also realized that there's a more generic version of this that's useful, which is sometimes you want to inherit behaviors from the context of the site that you're in, but not necessarily from the nav route. Maybe you want to have settings to change the header on any particular folder or something like that. So that's what the inherent service does. You specify one particular behavior that you want to get, and it looks through the hierarchy for the closest parent that has that behavior assigned, and then it returns the items, the fields from that behavior. And it even tells you which item it came from. Yeah, so one example here, we have this behavior in Volta Light theme with some settings for the header. But a different example is we've got a feature we were adding to our internet sites where you can assign a person who's responsible for content, and you can do this at any level of the hierarchy in any folder, and it will be inherited by the other content under that item. So then we can have a feedback form that goes to the person that's been assigned to this section of the site. I heard somebody whisper acquisition, and yeah, it's basically like acquisition, but trying to do it better and not have it be automatic like acquisition was, which is what always caused problems. One of the new features in Plone 6.1 was dynamic teaser blocks, which looks like this in the Volta UI, this checkbox for not customizing the teaser content. Basically, if you customize it, you can override the title, the description, the preview image of the page. Otherwise, you'll see dynamically what is the current title, description, preview image of that content item. And that's driven by some things we added to the REST API that actually looks up what's the linked item, what's the current title, and it returns that when it's serializing the content. All right, that's the quick version of what's happened the last few years. Now let's look ahead. The roadmap is pretty simple. Don't break it. The goal is stability, not changing things that we don't have to. We will make a 10.0 release soon, and really there's one thing that we want to do there, which is technically a breaking change. We want to remove the setup tools namespace because we're switching to the native namespaces that Python packages have now. That sounds a little scary in terms of having our stable base, maintaining compatibility. I think it's possible to still install the package in an old version of Plone and have it work, maybe with some additional tooling, but we have to confirm that works out okay. In any case, we will continue to support a migration path. So even if it's not possible to install a new version of Plone.REST API at some point in older Plones, you'll still be able to use an old version of Plone.REST API to export things and then import that into the new version. And then finally, because this is a work in progress, I'll mention it. Rohan is doing some work on the recycle bin plip, and a lot of that work so far has been in classic UI, but now he's working on adding it also to the REST API, which will then be the foundation for adding the feature to Volta as well. This is also looking forward, but I'm calling it the wish list instead of the roadmap because it's not anything that people are actively working on. This is throwing out ideas in hopes that one of you will look at it and say, oh yeah, that'd be really nice. I want to work on that. Continuing to work on completeness. So one thing that would be nice to have is a permissions endpoint. So you can do the fine-grained, like seeing which roles have this permission in this point in the site and updating those permissions. A catalog endpoint to do the things that you can currently do in the ZMI to see what items exist and what indexes and what the values are, sort of poking at the internals. There's still a few control panel settings that are there in Classic, but not in available through the REST API. For example, being able to configure which types have commenting enabled. I don't think there's a way to do that. And being able to send a test email when you change your mail settings isn't in the REST API yet. So things like that. The folder type constraint feature, which is the ability to assign for a particular folder which types can be added inside it. That's not something that's in the API yet. And then the ellipsis is for, I'm sure there's other things as well. Any time that you find yourself having to go to Classic UI or ZMI when you're really trying to work in Volta, that's a sign maybe where something's missing. There's some optimizations we can do, particularly file uploads are currently done as base64 encoded text, and we could switch to a multi-part encoding. We could change things so that child items are something you can include in the serialization, but not included by default. This one I don't have time to explain properly, but it's supporting some things that we need for 7. There's problems that can happen if the serialization is fetched from the API on one host name and then saved to it on a different host name. And we could work around this if we just stop including full URLs and only include paths relative to the site root. This would be an option that we add, and we wouldn't break anything. With the current things that are happening with AI, there's maybe an increased need for some machine-readable representation of what things are available in the REST API. So open API spec, MCP description, those sorts of things. One thing that's been a challenge with open API is it's not really designed for the hierarchical model we have with our content, where you have the same API available at different places. But we could perhaps just make the open API spec a thing that's generated in a particular context and includes the API that's available in that context. There's been some talk of adding a forms backend to core, taking probably the thing that exists as the backend for Volto Forms block and putting it into the REST API. Bulk operations, so if you want to run a batch across a whole bunch of different content items and perform some operation on each one of them, we don't have a good way of performing that from through the API right now. It's something that we usually use scripts in Python for still. This is kind of a wild idea, but like a streaming API, I don't know what this would look like in terms of how it integrates into the existing server, but an API where you can connect and get a stream of events as they happen, as things are being edited. It'd be useful to have a test suite which is different than the one we have now. The one right now is part of the Plone.REST API package, and it runs in Python, and it tests itself. But this would be a test suite that you could also run against Nick or against Guillotina to sort of check and see, like, does this conform to the specification that we expect for the API? And last, time travel would be cool. And by that, I mean, it would be nice to see what was stored in your database 2 days ago. And we have in Zope this thing called zc.before storage, where you can configure a special connection that shows you only the objects that existed at a certain point in time, as long as they haven't been packed. And I think it might be possible to do something similar in the REST API, where you can specify maybe a header that says only show me things as of this date, and then you'd be able to access, it would open up the same type of connection to the database where you would only see things from that point in time. That's an experiment I haven't had a chance to actually try yet, but I think it might be possible. So yeah, just to wrap things up, these are, I need to be clear, not all of the contributors. I think this is everybody who's made a commit in the past 2 years, but I'm relying on what GitHub's telling me. So sorry if I missed you. I was quite pleased to see how many people have been contributors, even in that time frame. And also, I want to encourage any of you, if you are interested in seeing things change in Plone REST API, maybe you have a particular issue that you filed that something isn't happening, or a particular feature that you want added, let's have a conversation and talk about how you can help contribute. So there we have the state of the Plone REST API, and I'd be happy to take a question or two.
Thanks, David. Questions? Yeah.
First, thanks for the talk. I think the REST API is one of the most important parts of Plone. I also think without it, Plone would maybe not even exist anymore in that, or with a similar tool like the REST API, Plone would not even exist anymore as it is existing now, with all these possibilities to add front-end frameworks on top of it. Yes, and I was always wondering, I also gave once a talk about the REST API for a Linux group in Graz, and the question I got back then was, yeah, there's so much noise in JSON responses. What about GraphQL? And I'm still wondering, what about GraphQL? Is it still a thing, or is it? I don't know.
I can't speak to that, and I mean, I haven't worked with GraphQL or paid too much attention to what's happening with it. My sense of GraphQL is that it provides more power in terms of your queries, and it maybe gives you less operational control over how those queries are going to run in your system. Like, you can express a query which is actually 10 different related queries and might take some time to run. And so I've been a little bit skeptical about whether it's the right thing to go to as your main API for a system, but I know there's people who like it. I'm sure it's partly just a matter of taste as well.
So there was this question this morning in a previous talk about somebody, what's the vision for Plone and the Plone backend? And I was a bit too candid and I shouted right away, no, we don't have a vision. Actually, we do. We've had this vision for a very long time already, which is when we started Plone is this CMS contract, where we do things because we started with an application server 25 years ago, is very different from other CMSs. And then this CMS conceptual contract that you have a hierarchical structure that you understand, containerization of objects and things, was then, as people said, then we added this REST API. And this REST API enabled to continue developing, swapping out the backends, as David showed, swap out the front ends, as we saw. And I think if yes, we do have a vision, and the vision is what David just presented, which is the implementation of the vision, and the vision that we will probably drive for the next years, which is this really open, interconnected implementation of a REST API, where you can have open operations, open development, and you can swap out things. So to continue to go back, I think this is the vision, driving this REST API and this independence further for years to come for any CMS like system.
Yeah, I was going to say this is my vision for Plone.REST API itself as a package, but you're talking also more about the broader vision of how that fits into Plone, the ecosystem.
Just a very simple question. Is this REST API bidirectional, so you could query Volto? Because you were showing that it was doing the backends.
I'm not sure what you mean by querying Volto.
Would you be able to do the same operations on Volto as you would do, for example, on Plone?
Yeah, that's what I mean about the completeness. I mean, Volto is built. All of Volto's communication with Plone is through the REST API. So in order for something to be done in the Volto UI, we have to add it to the REST API. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, we can take it off.
Yeah. Let's make sure I understand what you were wondering.
I think we are pretty much running out of time soon, so
I'll be around. Catch me in the hallway.
yeah. One more applause for David.